The Pentagon revealed that the U.S. is reopening an airbase in Thailand for the use of fighter bombers en route to Southeast Asia to bolster supported South Vietnamese forces. More firepower into Vietnam. This time it's a guided missile borne on a helicopter. The gunships are brought in from duty in Germany to help repel North Vietnamese tanks used in the spring offensive.
It is 1969. President Richard Nixon, freshly in the White House, promises to end the war against communist forces in Vietnam. He is the third president tasked with ending the war. As such, he also inherits the decisions of the Johnson administration. Amongst the most tragic are the U.S. soldiers taken prisoners of war by the North Vietnamese. Their stories will reveal the horrific truth behind treatment of POWs. Nixon's attempt to simultaneously reduce American forces overseas and to keep protesters at bay at home is poised to backfire. The next 2 years for the new president will find his authority and judgment tested in ways he may never have imagined. The North Vietnamese claim captured U.S. airmen shot down during North Vietnam bombing raids and missions are to be treated as war criminals. As such, they are not to receive the courtesies granted prisoners of war per the 1947 Geneva Convention, which North Vietnam had themselves signed. They refused to identify their prisoners to America, release the sick and wounded, and instead let them fester in unsanitary conditions. They also deny any inspection of their camps to outside parties. One such POW is a young Navy lieutenant, Paul Galanti. He is 26 when his plane is shot down on June 17, 1966.
It's tough to prepare for something when you don't know how long it's going to last. We'd gone to survival school, SEER school, survival, escape, resistance, and evasion. We'd gone to SEER school, and it's pretty realistic, except we knew in 3 days we'd be getting out and going back to the club or going back to the base. And so you can't simulate day after day after day after day after day after day after day, not knowing when it's going to end. And that was the toughest part. We couldn't train for that. We trained for the torture. We trained for evading questions. We trained for just about everything. They didn't teach us how to communicate covertly, which was, they do that now, but they didn't do it then. And but the training was okay. But none of us was ever going to get captured. I mean, you think about getting killed, that went with the turf back then. Being a Navy pilot was the most dangerous job in the world. It was more dangerous than steeplejacks or high steel workers. It was, we had a lot of accidents, operational accidents. I got shot down 6 months into cruise and into the combat part of the cruise, and we'd had 13 people killed at that point out of 80 combat pilots, which is pretty substantial number.
Galanti's ordeals start before even arriving at the prison itself.
Well, I landed about 100 miles south of Hanoi, and it took 12 days to get there because you couldn't travel in the daytime. We owned the roads, and the Vietnamese captured me almost immediately. I think they were going to shoot me. I was tied to it. Just been dropping bombs on their houses a few minutes before, and not in their houses, but in the villages. And they didn't like us a lot. So, I mean, they turned the village loose on us. Little kids and women were coming up and beating us with sticks and throwing rocks at us. I said, it was just me initially, then 2 Air Force guys joined up.
Deprived of sleep, beaten, refused food, have their fingernails ripped out, are shot at, and even burned by cigarettes. Many times they are practically starved, living off a diet of mostly rice. Not even allowed space to stretch, they're often locked in small cages or cuffed.
It was a 20 by 15. There were 3 of us in it, but it looks like I'm in solitary in the room. The smallest was about 4 feet by 6 feet, and it included a bed that had about a foot down the side between the bed and the other wall to just kind of try and walk back and forth on. 3 paces turn, 3 paces turn. That was the smallest one. It was 6 by 4 by about 14 feet up. And so they were miserable. Some of them had concrete slab for a bed. Some of them had boards. The boards are much softer than concrete. And some of the concrete ones had stocks at the bottom, like the ones in Williamsburg, where they could lock your feet in.
The Nixon administration is vocal in demanding fair treatment of American POWs. The president meets with President Nguyen Van Chu of South Vietnam on June 8, 1969. The place is Midway Island. By the end of the meeting, Nixon has set the immediate withdrawal of 25,000 American troops. In a so-called goodwill gesture, North Vietnam releases 3 American POWs. They are Seaman Apprentice Douglas B. Hegdahl and Lieutenant Robert Frischman of the U.S. Navy and Captain Wesley Rumble of the U.S. Air Force. Hegdahl was knocked overboard from his ship off the Gulf of Tonkin on April 6, 1967.
He was a seaman apprentice. He didn't even go to survival school. He's on a ship, and it was a World War II cruiser and didn't have any air conditioning, so he's out in the middle of the South China Sea, and the temperatures inside that ship were 120 or 130 degrees, so the sailors would go out and sleep on the deck where it's only 80 degrees or 90 degrees, and he missed the general quarters call and was on the deck when they fired the big guns. He went right over the side and ended up swimming and swam for 12 hours and picked up by a Vietnamese fishing boat.
He's only 19 at the time. The Hanoi Hilton is just one of the sites of inhumane tortures and unendurable pain to the American POWs.
5 in the morning, they'd bang on garbage can lids. It's supposed to be a gong, but it sounded like it was just a real cheap garbage can lid. Wake us up, and then they'd play the Radio Hanoi, the English language version of it, on a PA system around the camp. About 10 o'clock, the first meal would come, which is usually a little crust of bread. And it's some greens or pumpkin soup, which is just water and pumpkin or kale thrown into it, and a piece of bread or some rice. And then at 2 o'clock, the second last meal would come, and that was usually the same thing. And then at night, 8 o'clock at night, the camp radio would come back on again and be a rerun of the English language broadcast, usually with the American traders, Tom Hayden and Jane Fonda and the rest of them came over to pat the North Vietnamese on the back for defeating the U.S. aggressors. And that was it. That was the day. The rest of the time was the North Vietnamese, everybody, including the guards, would take siestas at noon, so that was a good time for us to communicate by tapping on the walls. And every opportunity we could, we tried to communicate with other Americans. But that was it. And if you had a couple or 3 guys to a room, you had something to talk about and refresh each other. I taught every roommate I ever lived with knows how to speak French now, or at least my version of it, which has more of a American accent than anything else. But so it was incredibly boring. The thing that kept us going was each other, and the fact that we weren't going to cave in.
The Viet Cong also employ solitary confinement for prisoners for indeterminate lengths of time.
The absolute worst time for me was being in solitary and out of communication, which happened a couple of times, and I really didn't like that. In fact, I'd prefer to get tortured and get it over with than go through 6 months of solitary. Well, longest, it's a lot longer than that for some. My longest stretch was 9 months, and about a year total with small groups. Because the trouble, you don't know what they are. I mean, you go in solitary, it might be, at the end of 2 days you might get out, or it might be, next time you get out is 5 years. Several of the senior officers were in solitary for 5 years.
Prisoners are also subjected to attempted North Vietnamese brainwashing and indoctrination. They are encouraged to write anti-American statements, statements used for propaganda purposes and to break the prisoner's will. Any chance of escape from a POW camp are slim.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to help us produce more compelling historical content like this, please like, comment below, and share this video with fellow history buffs. And of course, be sure to subscribe to help keep history happening.